It was a quiet afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of afternoon when the streets are warm but peaceful, and most people are either rushing home or staring at their phones, lost in their own world. But Keanu Reeves was not like most people. He had just left a small bookstore with a new novel in his hand. His black cap pulled low over his forehead, his steps calm and steady. He liked walking alone. He enjoyed simple things, quiet streets, gentle air, the sound of birds on power lines. He turned down a side street where there weren't many people. The city noise faded a little, and only the soft hum of cars and distant voices remained. As he walked, something caught his eye. Just a few feet ahead, there was an old woman standing near the curb. She was small and thin, her shoulders curved with age. Her gray hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her hands were shaking slightly as she tried to lift two heavy grocery bags from the ground. The bags were full, maybe too full. One was tearing a little at the corner, and the woman seemed nervous. She looked around at people passing by, hoping someone might stop and help, but no one did. Everyone was too busy, lost in their phones, or walking too fast to notice her struggle. Keanu stopped walking, watching her for a second. She was trying again to lift the bags, her arms trembling, without thinking, without waiting. Keanu walked up to her slowly, not wanting to scare her. He smiled gently and said in a calm voice, "Excuse me, ma'am, would you like some help with those?" The old woman looked up at him, surprised. Her eyes were a soft blue, a little tired but kind. For a second, she didn't say anything. She just looked at him, then down at the bags, and then back at him again. "Oh, thank you, young man," she said, her voice weak but warm. "That's very kind of you." Keanu picked up both bags with ease. They were heavy, but he didn't mind. He had carried much heavier things in his life, both in movies and in real life. He stood beside her, smiling again. "Where to?" he asked politely. She pointed down the street. "Just 2 blocks that way. It's a small building with red doors." He nodded, and they started walking together, slowly, at her pace. As they walked, she began to talk, not because he asked, but because his presence made her feel safe. She said her name was Elsie, and she had lived in that neighborhood for over 40 years. She used to live with her husband, but he passed away some time ago. Her only son had died in an accident, and now she lived alone. She didn't complain, she simply told her story as if it was just how life was. Keanu didn't say much, he just listened, really listened, not like someone who was waiting for their turn to speak, but like someone who truly cared. He nodded, sometimes offered a quiet word here and there, but mostly, he let her speak. She said she used to be a school teacher. She missed teaching the little ones, she said. They had so many questions, and I loved that. She chuckled softly. "They made me feel young." Keanu smiled. "You must have been a good teacher." She laughed a little. "Well, I tried. Some of them still send me letters, you know, after all these years." They reached the building she mentioned. It was old, but clean and well kept. The red door stood just like she said, with small flowers growing in pots on either side. Keanu followed her to the steps and placed the grocery bags gently at the top. She turned to him and said, "You know, you look familiar. Have we met before?" He gave a small smile and said, "I get that sometimes." Elsie nodded, squinting a little. "Maybe I've seen you around. You have a kind face." Keanu looked down for a second, then back up. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm glad I could help." She opened the door and turned to him one last time. "Would you like a glass of water?" "It's the least I can do." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, I'd like that." She stepped aside and let him in. The hallway smelled like old books and fresh flowers. The air was cool, and everything inside looked like it had a story. What started as a simple act of kindness was about to become something far more meaningful. But at that moment, Keanu didn't know that the woman whose groceries he had carried would reveal something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Keanu stepped gently into the small apartment behind the old woman. The hallway was narrow but clean. A soft light glowed from a lamp on the side table, and the smell of Something like rosewater floated in the air. It felt warm. It felt like someone had taken care of the place for a long time. Like love still lived there even if time had passed. The old woman, Elsie, led him into the living room. The room was filled with things that looked like memories, old photo frames on the walls, books stacked neatly on the shelves, and a cozy chair near the window with a knitted blanket over it. There was a soft hum of an old radio playing music in the background. Some slow tune from decades ago. "You can sit there, dear," Elsie said, pointing to the couch. "Let me get you some water." Keanu smiled and sat down, placing the grocery bags gently on the floor. He looked around while she walked slowly into the kitchen. Everything in the room told a story, and he could feel it even without asking. He noticed a dusty piano in the corner, some medals in a glass box on a shelf, and one large photo of a young man in a military uniform. Smiling proudly, Elsie returned with a small glass of water and handed it to him. Her hands trembled a little, but her smile was steady. "Thank you again," she said softly. "Most people just walk by these days." Keanu nodded. "It's no problem. I'm glad I could help." She sat down slowly in the chair by the window and looked out for a moment. The sky outside had started to turn orange, the sun slowly sinking behind the rooftops. Then she turned her eyes to him again, looking at his face with curiosity. "You really do look familiar, like someone I've seen in a movie maybe, but I can't remember which one," she said with a little chuckle. Keanu smiled kindly. "People say that a lot," he said simply, not giving away who he really was. He wasn't trying to hide, but he wasn't looking for attention either. He enjoyed moments like these, quiet, honest, and without fame standing in the way. She leaned forward just a little and asked, "What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?" Keanu thought for a second and replied, "I tell stories. I work in movies sometimes." "Oh," she nodded. "Stories are important. They keep us alive in a way," he agreed with a soft, "Yes, they do." A few seconds of peaceful silence passed between them. Then Keanu pointed toward the photo of the young man in the military uniform. "That photo," he asked, "is that your husband?" Her eyes turned to it, and a gentle smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said. "That's James. He was my everything." Keanu looked at it more closely. The man in the photo had a kind face and strong eyes. There was something familiar about him too. Something deep in Keanu's memory started to stir, but he didn't say anything just yet. "He was in the Air Force," Elsie continued. "He served for many years. Always said duty wasn't something to be proud of. It was something to be grateful for." Keanu listened carefully, letting her words sink in. She went on. "James was the kind of man who helped others without needing thanks. One time, many years ago, he saved a little girl in Canada from a car accident. Just ran in and pulled her out." Keanu's heart skipped a beat. His eyes lifted from the photo to her face. His mind raced back through time, back to a day when he was just a boy. His younger sister had almost been hit by a speeding car in Toronto. A man had pushed her out of the way and disappeared before anyone could thank him. His family talked about it for years, but they never found out who the man was. "Was that in Toronto?" Keanu asked quietly, his voice more serious now. Elsie looked surprised. "Yes, it was." "How did you know?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, staring at the photo now with new eyes. "Because that little girl he saved, that was my sister." The room fell silent. Even the soft radio seemed to fade away. Elsie's lips parted in shock, her eyes wide. Her fingers touched her mouth as she whispered, "Oh my God." Keanu nodded slowly. "We never knew who he was. He just walked away after saving her. My family always wanted to find him, to thank him, but we had no name, no way to know." Tears began to fill Elsie's eyes. She blinked quickly and looked again at the photo, then back at Keanu. That was James. That was just like him. He would never wait for praise. He always said doing good was reward enough. Keanu's voice was soft, filled with emotion. "He changed our lives. My sister is alive because of him, and now All these years later, I meet you by chance on the street. Elsie reached for a tissue. Wiping her tears, maybe it wasn't chance, she said gently. Maybe it was time. They sat in silence again, but this time it was a powerful silence, full of understanding and something sacred. Two people connected not by blood, but by a moment of courage long ago, and a quiet act of kindness that had come full circle. Keanu looked around her apartment again, and this time, everything felt different. He wasn't just helping a stranger anymore, he was honoring a man who once saved his family, and he knew, deep in his heart, that he was exactly where he needed to be. Keanu sat quietly on the couch, still thinking about what Elsie had just told him. It felt almost unreal. How could it be possible? All these years he had wondered who the man was who saved his little sister's life, and now, here he was, sitting in the home of that very man's wife, just because he stopped to help her with groceries. It felt like the world had led him here on purpose. Elsie stood up slowly and walked toward a wooden shelf in the corner of the room. Her fingers touched each frame gently as if every photo was made of glass. She picked up the one of James in uniform and brought it to Keanu. This photo was taken the week he returned from his last mission. She said softly, "He never talked much about what he did, but I always knew he did more than he told me." Keanu took the frame from her hands carefully and looked closer. The face was even more familiar now, not just because of the old memory, but because of the feeling, the energy, something noble in the eyes. His heart felt heavy, full, like he had found something precious that was lost for a long time. Then, Elsie looked at him and said, "Wait here," and slowly walked into the next room. She was gone for a moment, and Keanu sat there, staring at the picture in his hand. The room felt still, as if it was holding its breath. When Elsie returned, she was holding a small brown box with both hands. It was old and slightly worn, but clean and cared for. She placed it gently on the table in front of Keanu. "This was James's memory box," she said quietly. "He kept letters, medals, and little pieces of paper that meant something to him. I haven't opened it in years." Keanu looked at her for a second, then slowly opened the box inside. Were old letters folded carefully, a few black and white photos, a small leather notebook, and 2 military medals with shining pins. He picked up one letter. It was yellow with time, the paper soft and fragile. He opened the letter carefully and began to read. The handwriting was neat and strong. It was a letter James had written to himself, probably never sent. In it, he talked about the day he saved a child in Toronto. The words were simple. "Saw a car speeding toward the sidewalk. A little girl in the path, ran in, pulled her back just in time, didn't wait to explain. I heard the mother crying behind me, but I had to go. Hope they are okay." Keanu's hands began to shake slightly. It was real. It was all true. This man James had truly saved his sister, and now years later, fate had brought him into this room, reading the very memory James had written down with his own hand. Elsie watched him, her own eyes wet with emotion. "I remember that day," she whispered. "He came home. Said nothing for hours. He just sat near the window, thinking. Later that night, he told me what happened, and all he said was, 'I just did what anyone should have done.'" Keanu looked up, his voice low. "Not everyone would have done it. Some people would have watched, some would have frozen, but he moved. He saved her." Elsie gave a small nod, her lips trembling. "That's the kind of man he was," she said. "And now you're here. You carried my groceries. And I had no idea who you were, and yet, somehow, you were connected to him all along." Keanu took a deep breath and smiled gently. "I didn't expect this at all. I just saw someone who needed help, and now I realize maybe I needed to be here more than I thought." Elsie reached across and held his hand with her frail fingers. "You being here," she said, "feels like James is still doing good through you. He always believed one act of kindness leads to another." Keanu didn't know what to say. He just nodded, feeling a mix of sadness, gratitude, and peace. It was like something inside him had finally found rest. The mystery of that day long ago was no longer a mystery, and the man he had always wanted to thank had a face, a name, and a story that now lived in his heart forever. They sat there together, quiet and thoughtful. The radio played another soft tune in the background, and the orange light of evening spilled through the window, painting the room with a golden glow. Before Keanu stood up to leave, he looked at Elsie and said, "Can I come back sometime? Not just to visit, but maybe to know more about James?" Elsie smiled, her eyes bright despite the tears. "You are welcome here any time," she said. "You're not a stranger anymore. You're part of the story now." Keanu nodded slowly, and as he walked out the door into the quiet street, he looked up at the sky. Something had changed inside him, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a deep, silent one, and somewhere, in the peace of that golden evening, it felt like James was watching too, quietly smiling, proud that a small moment of bravery had planted a seed that bloomed decades later, in the most unexpected way. The next morning, Keanu woke up early. But his thoughts were not on work or scripts or cameras. His mind was still back in that small apartment, with the old woman named Elsie and the photo of the man who had once saved his sister's life. It was hard to believe everything that happened the day before. It felt like a dream, but it was real, every single moment of it. He remembered how her eyes had filled with tears when they made the connection. He remembered how it felt to hold that letter, the one James wrote after saving his sister. Keanu had thought he would never find out who that man was. Yet, somehow, through a simple act of kindness, the universe brought him face to face with the truth he had waited for nearly his whole life. He couldn't stop thinking about James, the quiet hero who never waited for a thank you, the man who saved a little girl and just walked away, not needing anything in return. Keanu had always believed in fate, in small moments that shaped the future. But now more than ever, he was sure that life was filled with invisible threads, connecting people when they least expect it. Later that day, Keanu returned to Elsie's home. He knocked gently on the door, and when she opened it, her face lit up with a warm smile. "You came back," she said softly. "I had to," he said. "I couldn't stop thinking about our talk yesterday. I'd like to know more about James, if that's okay." She stepped aside to let him in. The room looked the same, quiet, peaceful, full of memories. Keanu sat on the couch, and Elsie went to get something. When she returned, she held a small photo album in her hands, old but still strong. She placed it in Keanu's lap, and he opened it slowly. Each page was full of black and white photos. Some showed James in uniform. Others showed him with Elsie when they were young, laughing, holding hands, standing by a lake. There was one photo of James holding a newborn baby in a hospital. Elsie whispered, "That was our son." Keanu turned each page with care, as if each one was a piece of time. "He seemed like a kind man," he said. "He was," Elsie replied, her eyes shining. "He was quiet but strong. He believed in doing the right thing, even if no one was watching. That's just who he was." Keanu stopped at one photo that made him stare longer than the others. It was a picture of James standing next to a child, not family, not anyone Elsie knew. "Who's this boy?" Keanu asked. Elsie looked closer and blinked in surprise. "I don't remember. Maybe someone James helped. He often did things like that and never told me." Keanu smiled to himself, thinking, that's just what James would do, help people and move on. No need for reward, no need for praise. Elsie closed the album and looked at Keanu with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Of course," Keanu replied. "Why didn't you tell me yesterday who you were?" she asked. "I mean, I've seen your movies now and then. I just didn't connect the dots until last night. But you didn't say anything." Keanu smiled gently. "Because it didn't matter," he said. "I wasn't there as an actor. I was just a person helping someone. That's all." Elsie nodded slowly. "You remind me of James in that way," she said. "He never wanted attention, just wanted to do good." That simple line touched Keanu deeply. He never thought of himself as a hero, but hearing her compare him to the man who once saved his sister, it meant more than any award he had ever received. After a moment of silence, Elsie stood up and walked to her drawer. She took out something wrapped in a soft cloth and handed it to Keanu. "This," she said, "was James's dog tag from the military. He always kept it close. But I want you to have it now, as a reminder." Keanu opened the cloth slowly, revealing the old metal tag, slightly scratched, but still strong and clear. His hands trembled slightly as he read the name and number engraved on it. It felt heavy, not just in weight, but in meaning. "I can't take this," Keanu said, his voice thick. "It belongs to you," Elsie smiled. "No, dear, it belongs to those he touched, and you. You and your sister. You are a part of his story too." Keanu looked at her, not sure how to express what he was feeling. "Thank you," he finally said. "I'll keep it safe, always." As he left the apartment that day, Keanu looked up at the sky. The air felt different, lighter. He carried James's dog tag in his pocket, close to his heart, and with every step, he felt the weight of memory, the beauty of connection, and the silent strength of a man who once changed everything, simply by being good. Keanu didn't need to shout this story to the world. He didn't post about it, didn't run to tell the media. To him, it was something sacred, something private and powerful, something that would live inside him forever, not as a headline but as a truth. And as he walked down that familiar street once more, he knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something new, something good born from something long ago, all because one man chose to be kind and walked away without needing thanks. The days passed quietly, but something inside Keanu had changed. Since the day he met Elsie, life had started to feel different, not busy or loud, but more meaningful. Every moment felt deeper, even the simple ones. He couldn't stop thinking about James, the man who had given so much without asking for anything in return. And now Keanu wanted to give something back, not for attention, not for praise, but because it felt right. One morning, Keanu made a quiet phone call. He spoke with a woman who helped him with planning and arrangements. "I want it to be simple," he told her. "No media, no crowd, just something kind, something personal." She didn't ask many questions. She knew Keanu well enough to understand when something came from his heart. A few days later, Elsie heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, there was no one there. Only a delivery man walking away, and 2 large boxes sitting neatly outside. She looked around, surprised, then slowly pulled the boxes inside. A little note was taped to one of them, written in soft handwriting. "Dear Elsie, just a small thank you for your stories, your warmth, and for James, with respect. K." She sat down slowly, hands shaking a little, and opened the first box. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a brand new heating system, a modern unit with remote controls and a small screen. Her old heater had been broken for years, and she had never complained about it. She just wore extra layers in the winter and used thick blankets. But now, the second box, was filled with things that made her eyes well up. Fresh groceries, beautifully packed, with her favorite things, small jars of fruit jam, the tea she always loved but rarely bought, a warm wool blanket, and even a hand-knitted shawl in soft pink. She didn't know how he knew all of this, but he did, and she felt the kindness in every small detail. Elsie placed the blanket over her shoulders and sat in her chair by the window. She looked out at the sky, the clouds moving slowly, the sun shining gently. "James," she whispered, "you sent him to me, didn't you?" Later that evening, Keanu visited again. He brought no cameras, no attention, just his presence. And when she opened the door, she didn't say anything at first. She just pulled him into a gentle hug, soft but full of meaning. "You didn't have to do all that," she said with a trembling smile. "I know," Keanu replied softly, "but I wanted to. It felt like the right thing." They sat together in the warm room, the new heater humming quietly in the background. She poured him tea, and they talked like old friends. They spoke about James again, about life, about how kindness often goes unseen but never forgotten. Keanu asked about James's favorite things, and Elsie laughed as she shared stories. He loved jazz music, she said. Used to dance with me in the kitchen every Sunday. She smiled at the memory, even when we got old. He still took my hand when the music started. Keanu smiled warmly, picturing it in his mind. Sounds like a movie, he said gently. No, Elsie replied. It was just love, plain and real. That night after he left, Keanu sat in his car for a long time before driving away. He thought about how simple acts could carry so much power. A bag of groceries, a quiet talk, a warm blanket. None of it made headlines, but all of it mattered deeply. He remembered something his mother once told him when he was young. Real strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And that's enough. The next week, Keanu made another quiet call. This time to someone in the music world, a friend who helped with events. I want to organize something, he said. Small, respectful, meaningful, and I want it to be in James's name, his friend asked. What kind of event? Keanu answered, something where people can share acts of kindness, maybe a little gathering. Music, letters, stories. The idea began to take shape, a night to honor quiet heroes like James, the people who make a difference without needing. Thanks, Keanu didn't want it to be about him. He wanted it to be about the spirit of giving, about love that never fades, about bravery that expects nothing in return. And while all this was happening, Elsie kept writing. Each day, she wrote a little story in her notebook, memories of James, thoughts about life, and pieces of the journey that brought Keanu to her door. I'm not a writer, she'd laugh to herself, but some things are too beautiful to keep locked in the heart. Keanu would read her notes during his visits, always touched by her words. You should publish these someday, he told her once. She smiled. Maybe, but for now, they're just for you. The bond between them was no longer about the past. It had become something present, alive, built on respect, kindness, and something even deeper, understanding. Elsie often said, James would have liked you. And Keanu would reply, I already like him. Their story wasn't loud. It wasn't filled with big drama or flashing lights. But it had something far more powerful, truth. And sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay in the heart forever. Elsie woke up that morning like any other day. She made herself a small cup of tea, opened the window to let the fresh air in, and wrapped herself in the soft pink shawl that Keanu had sent her. The heater hummed quietly in the background, warming the little apartment just enough to make it feel like a hug. Outside, the world was busy, but inside everything was peaceful. She looked around her home, at the pictures, the memories, the silence. And then her eyes rested on the photo of James. She smiled. I have something to tell you, she whispered to the photo, like she had done many times before. You wouldn't believe who's been visiting me lately. Later that day, she heard a soft knock at the door. When she opened it, Keanu was standing there, not with groceries this time, not with gifts, but with something else. Something you couldn't hold in your hands. He was holding an envelope, sealed with care, and a gentle smile on his face. I hope I'm not interrupting anything, he said quietly. Elsie shook her head and stepped aside. Come in, dear. You know you're always welcome. He sat down on the couch, looking around like he always did, comfortable now, as if this was his second home. He handed her the envelope, and she opened it slowly. Inside was a beautiful letter, typed neatly, and at the top were the words, The James Memorial Evening, a celebration of quiet heroes. She read it carefully, her fingers shaking a little as her eyes moved down the page. The letter explained everything. Keanu had planned a small event, a peaceful night filled with music, soft lights, and shared stories. A place where people could come and talk about acts of kindness that had touched their lives. And it would be named in honor of her late husband, James. When she finished reading, she looked up at Keanu, her eyes full of tears. You did this? She asked, voice soft and full of emotion. He nodded. I wanted people to know the kind of man he was. I wanted others to be inspired by the way he lived. Elsie placed her hand on his, her voice trembling. He would have never asked for this. But he would have been so moved, so proud. Keanu stayed for a while. And they talked more about James, about the event, about the people who would come and share their own stories of kindness and quiet courage. Elsie asked, "Will you speak?" "That night?" Keanu hesitated. "Only if you want me to," she smiled gently. "I'd like that. I think you and James are more alike than you know." A week later, the event was ready. It was held in a small community hall not far from Elsie's home. There were no cameras, no red carpet, just chairs in a circle, soft music playing, candles flickering gently on tables, and a quiet respect that filled the room like air. People came, some neighbors, some strangers, a few families who had seen small notes in the community newsletter. They didn't come for fame. They came because the idea touched something deep in them. They came because they had their own James in their life. Someone who had helped them, someone who had shown them kindness when they needed it most. Elsie arrived with Keanu by her side. Wearing a simple dress and the shawl, she was nervous at first, but when she saw how peaceful everything was, her heart felt calm. She sat in the front row, and when the music faded, the host stood up and spoke gently about the meaning of the evening. "Tonight we don't honor big names," he said. "We honor big hearts." Then, Keanu stood up, holding a small paper in his hands. He looked around the room and spoke in a quiet, steady voice. "Years ago, someone saved my sister's life. We never knew who he was, but just recently I found out, not through a movie, not through a headline, but by helping an elderly woman carry her groceries." People listened, eyes wide, breath held. "That man was James," Keanu continued. "He didn't wait for thanks. He just did what was right. And now his kindness lives on. Not just in memory, but in moments like this." He looked at Elsie, who was holding her tears behind a gentle smile. "I'm here today because one man decided to act when it mattered, and I believe deeply that we all have that power to change someone's life through something small." The room was silent for a long time, not because people didn't know what to say, but because they were feeling something strong, something real. Then people began to speak one by one. They shared short stories about a teacher who believed in them, a neighbor who helped when no one else did, a stranger who paid for their meal when they had nothing left. It was beautiful, raw, honest, and every word felt like a thread, weaving something bigger than all of them. After the event, Elsie hugged Keanu and said, "You brought James back tonight, not just for me, but for everyone here." Keanu looked into her kind eyes and said, "You brought him back too, through every word, every photo, every memory. You kept him alive, and in that moment, surrounded by flickering candles, soft music, and warm hearts, it became clear that kindness never dies. It simply travels through time, through people, through quiet stories that live forever in the hearts they touch." It had been a few weeks since the memorial evening, but the feeling still stayed with everyone who had attended. Something about that night had touched people deeply. Strangers had left the room feeling like family, and small acts of kindness started to spread through the neighborhood like quiet waves on a calm lake. No one forgot the name James, and they definitely didn't forget the old woman who spoke softly about love that never left, or the man who stood beside her and simply listened. News of the event slowly reached more people, not through social media or television, but by word of mouth. A local community blog shared a short post with the title, "The Night That Celebrated Kindness," and mentioned how a quiet man named James had once saved a child's life and inspired a whole room without even being there. The story could have ended there, but kindness doesn't stop when the lights go out. It grows in silence, and it shows up in places where no one is watching. One day, Elsie was sitting by the window, reading a letter from someone she had never met before. It was from a woman who had lost her husband and read about the memorial online. The letter said, Your story gave me hope. It reminded me that love never really goes away. It just changes form." Elsie wiped her tears and placed the letter in her drawer. Beside James's photo, her small home was slowly filling with letters. Like that kind words from people touched by a story that began with 2 grocery bags and a simple act, and Keanu. He kept visiting, not every day, but often enough that Elsie's face would light up the moment she heard his knock. They never needed big conversations. Sometimes they just sat quietly, drinking tea, listening to soft music, looking through old photo albums. Time slowed down when they were together, and in that slowness, life felt full. One afternoon, Keanu brought something different. He entered the house holding a medium-sized box. Not too big, not too small. He placed it on the table and said, "I thought it was time." Elsie tilted her head. "Time for what?" Keanu gently opened the box, and inside was a hardcover book, simple, elegant, with a photo of a young soldier on the cover. James. The title was written in gold letters, "The Quiet Hero, a Love That Never Left." It was Elsie's own words. Her letters, her stories, the memories she had written down day by day. Keanu had taken all of it, with her permission, and turned it into a small book. Not to sell, not to make money, but to share with people who needed a reminder that true love, quiet bravery, and simple kindness still existed in the world. Elsie covered her mouth in surprise. Her eyes filled with tears. She gently picked up the book and turned the pages. One by one, she saw her handwriting turned into print, the old photographs carefully placed between stories, and at the very end Keanu's own message. It read, "To the man who saved my sister, to the woman who reminded me what love really is, and to every quiet hero out there, this is for you." Elsie looked up at him, completely speechless for a moment. Then she reached out and held his hand tightly. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Keanu shook his head. "You already did, every time you shared a memory, every time you spoke about James, you were giving something to the world. I just helped carry it forward." That evening, they sat together and read the book out loud, chapter by chapter, page by page. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they paused when the emotions became too much. But neither of them wanted to stop. It was more than just a book, it was James's life, and their story, and something that now belonged to others too. In the following days, Keanu quietly printed more copies and left them at libraries, hospitals, shelters, and even nursing homes. No press, no name on the cover. Just a story with a heart. A few people wrote back, saying it changed how they saw their own lives. Others said it gave them courage to forgive, to love again, to reach out to someone they'd been avoiding for years. Meanwhile, Elsie's apartment became brighter, not because of new paint or lights, but because of something warmer. Letters kept arriving. People sent little handmade gifts. One girl even sent a picture she drew of James in uniform with the words, "Thank you for being brave," written in crayon. Elsie placed that drawing next to James's medals, smiling every time she walked past it. "He would have loved this," she whispered one morning, her hand touching the frame. "He never liked being in the spotlight, but he deserved every bit of this." And Keanu, he kept being himself, never loud, never showy, always real. The world knew him as a movie star, but here, in that small apartment, he was just a man who had once been saved, who had once needed closure, and found more than that. He found peace, connection, and a second family. Their story wasn't over. It never really would be. Because when something is true, when it's made from love and kindness, it keeps going, even long after the people are gone. The story of James and Elsie had begun long ago, but through Keanu, it had been passed on, and through every reader who held that little book in their hands, the story kept breathing, gently, softly, just like the man who inspired it all. The seasons slowly changed. The wind that once carried golden leaves now brought a chill. Winter had come again, but inside Elsie's small apartment, it was still warm, not just from the new heater, but from the memories that lived in every corner, the photo of James still stood proudly near the window, and the little drawing from the child with the words, "Thank you for being brave," was now in a frame. Placed right beside it, Elsie had grown a bit weaker. She still smiled, still spoke with kindness. But her steps had slowed, her hands sometimes trembled more than before, and her voice was softer. Keanu noticed these changes, and though he didn't say anything, his heart felt heavy every time he left her door. One cold afternoon, Keanu visited. Again, this time carrying only a small bouquet of white flowers. Elsie opened the door, smiling as always, and welcomed him in. "These are lovely," she said, taking the flowers gently. "They remind me of the ones James used to bring me after every mission." Keanu sat with her as they sipped tea, and watched the quiet snow fall outside. "You ever think," she asked, "that maybe we don't meet people by accident?" Keanu nodded slowly. "I do now," he said with a small smile. "Meeting you. It changed me." She looked at him with soft eyes. "You changed me too. You brought James back into the world, not just for me, but for others too." They talked for a while longer, sharing simple stories, laughing quietly, holding on to the moment like it was something sacred. And when Keanu stood to leave, Elsie held his hand for a moment. "Thank you for carrying more than just my groceries," she whispered. "You carried my memories too." That night, Keanu went home and sat in silence, looking out at the city lights. He didn't feel like a famous man. He didn't feel like an actor. He felt like a son who had finally been able to say thank you to the hero his family never found, until now too. Weeks later, the phone rang. It was a neighbor of Elsie's. She spoke gently, her voice full of sadness. "Keanu," she said, "Elsie passed away in her sleep last night." Peaceful, with a smile on her face. Keanu closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't cry right away. Instead, he sat in silence, letting the memories return. The laughter, the stories, the soft music, and the gentle voice that had shared so much love. He wasn't surprised by the news, but that didn't make it easier. The next day, Keanu visited her apartment one last time. The neighbors had kept it untouched, as if waiting for him. He walked through the quiet rooms slowly. Every step felt like walking through a book filled with love, courage, and history. Near the photo of James, Keanu found a small envelope with his name on it. He opened it with care, and inside was a handwritten letter from Elsie. "Dear Keanu, if you are reading this, then I've gone to be with James again. Don't be sad. I had a beautiful life, more beautiful than I could have dreamed. You brought the last chapter of my life so much joy, peace, and love. You made me laugh again, made me feel young, and made me believe that stories never really end. Thank you for being the bridge between my heart and the world. You are a part of my family now, and James would be proud of you. With all my heart, Elsie." Keanu folded the letter slowly, holding it to his chest. A single tear rolled down his cheek, not just from sadness, but from deep love. He stood in the center of that room, surrounded by quiet, and whispered, "Thank you, Elsie. Thank you for everything." In the weeks that followed, Keanu arranged for Elsie to be laid to rest beside James. It was a small ceremony, just the way she would have wanted it. No noise, no show, only a few kind people, some soft music, and the book he had made placed gently in her hands. And even though she was gone, her story didn't stop. People continued to find the little book in unexpected places. They read about James's quiet heroism, Elsie's strength, and the kindness that connected two strangers across time. Letters continued to arrive, thanking whoever wrote this for helping them believe in good people again. Some said it gave them hope after losing someone. Others said it helped them forgive, or inspired them to do something kind for someone else. Keanu never claimed credit. He never needed to. He just smiled every time he heard about someone touched by the story. Years later, during an interview, someone asked Keanu about the small silver tag he wore around his neck. He looked down at it and smiled softly. "It belonged to a man who saved my sister's life when I was a kid," he said, "and I finally got to thank him Through his wife, who became my friend. The interviewer asked, "Do you believe in fate?" Keanu looked into the camera and answered simply, "I believe in kindness, and I believe it always finds its way back." And so the story lived on, not in newspapers, not in headlines, but in hearts, in quiet gestures, in the pages of a little book, and in every person who chose to help someone just because it felt right. Because sometimes, carrying someone's groceries leads to something far greater, a chance to carry their story forever.